I thought the woman standing at the end of the hallway was just another guest, until I realized no one else in the building could see her, and she hadn't moved for over 10 minutes. You're listening to True Haunting Log, where real stories don't just stay in one place, they wait. If you've experienced something you can't explain, send your story to truehauntinglog@gmail.com. Story 1. The Flapper Who Never Left Chicago. I wasn't expecting anything unusual that night. It was just another late shift in a building that had more history than most people cared to remember. The kind of place where old architecture met modern renovations, where polished floors and dim lighting tried to cover the age that still lingered underneath everything. And I had been working there long enough to know how the place behaved after hours, what sounds were normal, what patterns to expect, and more importantly, what didn't belong. The shift had been quiet, almost too quiet. The kind where time stretches and every small detail becomes more noticeable. And I remember walking through the hallways with that familiar sense of routine, checking doors, glancing into empty rooms, listening to the faint hum of the building settling into the night, until I turned into one of the longer corridors and saw her standing at the far end. At first, nothing about it felt wrong. She looked like a guest, just standing there near the corner where the lighting was dimmer, facing slightly toward the wall, as if she was waiting or thinking. And I didn't question it immediately because people linger all the time in places like that, but the longer I looked, the more something about it started to feel off. She wasn't moving at all, not shifting her weight, not adjusting her posture, not even reacting to the sound of my footsteps as I walked closer. And that alone was enough to make me slow down slightly, paying more attention than I normally would, trying to understand why that stillness felt so unnatural. As I got closer, the details became clearer, and that's when the confusion started to turn into something else, because what she was wearing didn't match anything I had seen before, not just in the building, but in general. The dress looked like it belonged to another time, fitted in a way that wasn't modern, with a style that felt deliberate and unfamiliar. And her hair matched it, short, shaped, styled in a way that didn't belong to anything current. My chest tightened slightly as I stopped walking completely, just watching her, waiting for some kind of reaction. But she didn't turn, didn't acknowledge me, didn't move at all. And in that moment, the hallway didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like something else was aware of her too. I stood there for a few seconds longer than I should have, my chest tightening slightly as I waited for her to react, because, in any normal situation, someone would have at least acknowledged my presence by then, even just a slight movement, a glance, something to confirm they were aware of me. But she didn't. She remained completely still, facing the same direction, her posture unchanged, her presence almost too steady to feel natural. I cleared my throat quietly, not loud enough to startle anyone, just enough to make it known that I was there. But even that didn't get a response, and that was the moment where the unease started to settle in more deeply, not as fear yet, but as something harder to explain, something that made me question whether I was interpreting the situation correctly. I took a slow step forward, my eyes fixed on her, and as I moved closer, the details became sharper. The outline of her dress more defined, the way the fabric fell, the way it caught the dim light, and the more I looked at it, the more certain I became that it didn't belong to this time. It looked like something from decades ago, something preserved rather than worn. Her hair was just as distinct, short and carefully shaped, styled in a way that felt deliberate and old-fashioned, and there was something about the way it sat, perfectly still, untouched by even the slight movement of air in the hallway that made it feel less like a person standing there and more like something fixed in place. I stopped again, now close enough that I should have been clearly visible to her, close enough that there was no way she hadn't heard me approaching, and for a moment I considered speaking, asking if she needed help, asking if she was lost. But something held me back, something subtle that made the situation feel different from what it should have been. The hallway itself felt quieter now, not just silent, but contained, like the sound didn't carry the same way it had before, and I became more aware of my own breathing. The way it sounded slightly louder in that space. The way every small movement seemed more noticeable than it should have been. Then I noticed something else. Her shadow. Or rather, the lack of it. The light in the hallway wasn't strong, but it was enough that I should have seen some kind of shadow cast behind her or along the wall, especially from the angle she was standing at. But there was nothing. No distortion, no outline, nothing to match her presence, and that was the moment where the unease shifted into something heavier, something that settled deeper in my chest. I took another step forward, slower this time, more cautious, and as I did, something changed. Not in her movement, not in her posture, but in the feeling of the space itself. The air in the hallway felt different the moment I stepped closer, like something had shifted, just enough for me to notice it. Not sudden, not obvious, but present in a way that made the silence feel heavier, more contained, and my chest tightened as I stood there watching her, trying to understand what I was looking at. Because the longer she remained still, the less it felt like normal behavior, and the more it felt like something was wrong in a way I couldn't immediately explain. I finally spoke, my voice low but clear, asking if she needed help, the sound leaving my mouth slower than usual as if the space itself resisted it. And for a moment after I spoke, nothing happened. No reaction, no acknowledgement, just that same stillness holding in place. And that was when the unease deepened further. Because even someone ignoring me would have shown something, a shift, a hesitation, anything at all, but she didn't, and that absence of response felt heavier than silence itself. Then, slowly, something changed. Not a full movement, not a step, just a slight tilt of her head, barely noticeable but enough to make my chest tighten instantly. Because it didn't feel natural, it didn't feel like a response to me. It felt delayed, controlled, like the movement didn't belong to the moment. I stood completely still, my breathing more controlled now, as if instinctively trying not to disturb whatever I was witnessing. And after a few seconds, she began to turn, slowly, far slower than any normal reaction would be, the kind of movement that stretches time and forces you to notice every second. And as she turned, the dim light caught her face, revealing it gradually, piece by piece, and what I saw didn't match what should have been there. Her expression was calm, almost distant, completely disconnected from the situation. There was no confusion, no acknowledgement, no awareness of me standing just a few feet away. And when her eyes finally aligned in my direction, they didn't meet mine. They passed over me, like I wasn't there at all, like I didn't exist in whatever space she was in. My chest tightened further as I realized something that didn't make sense but felt completely real in that moment. Because it wasn't just that she wasn't reacting to me, it was that she couldn't see me at all. I stayed where I was, my chest tightening as that realization settled in, because the way her eyes moved past me didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like absence, like I simply wasn't part of whatever she was experiencing, and that thought changed everything about the situation in a way I couldn't ignore. I shifted slightly, just enough to test it, just enough to see if changing my position would draw any reaction, but it didn't. Her gaze remained unfocused in my direction, fixed somewhere beyond me, and that made the unease deepen into something heavier, something closer to fear. The hallway around us felt different now, quieter than it should have been, like the sound had been pulled out of it, and even my own breathing felt too loud in that space, too present compared to the stillness she carried with her. I tried speaking again, a little louder this time, asking if she could hear me, but the result was the same. Nothing changed. No reaction, no acknowledgement, just that same distant expression as if my voice didn't exist in whatever state she was in. And for a moment I considered stepping directly into her line of sight, forcing her to notice me. But something stopped me, something instinctive that made me hesitate just before taking that step. Because as I watched her more closely, I noticed something else. She wasn't just standing there, she was repeating something. Not in an obvious way, but subtle, small, a pattern, the slight tilt of her head, the faint shift. of her posture. It happened again, and then again, exactly the same each time. My chest tightened as I realized I had seen that movement before, not just once, but in the exact same way, the exact same timing, like it wasn't happening naturally, like it was being replayed, and that understanding settled in slowly but heavily, because it meant she wasn't reacting to anything around her at all. She was locked into something that had already happened. I took a small step back without realizing it, my breathing becoming more controlled as I tried to process what I was seeing. And as I moved, her motion continued again. The same tilt, the same slight turn, the same distant expression, repeating without variation. And that was the moment it became clear. She wasn't there in the way I was. She wasn't aware. She wasn't present. She was part of something else, something that didn't include me at all. The repetition became impossible to ignore. The longer I stood there, my chest tightening as I watched her repeat, the same slight tilt of her head, the same subtle shift of her posture, the same slow, partial turn that never fully completed, over and over again, with no variation, no awareness, no response to anything around her. And the realization settled deeper that I wasn't witnessing a person, I was witnessing something playing back. I stayed completely still, not because I chose to, but because something about the moment made movement feel wrong, like stepping into that pattern would disrupt something I didn't understand. And the hallway itself felt different now, the silence heavier, the air colder, in a way that seemed to center around her rather than the space as a whole. And as I focused more carefully, I began to notice the exact timing of everything, the slight pause before her head tilted, the way her shoulders shifted just after, the fraction of a second where her face angled enough to catch the dim light before returning to that same distant position, and it was identical every time, perfectly consistent, like it wasn't happening in real time at all. That realization made something tighten in my chest again, because it meant this wasn't random. It wasn't an isolated moment. It was something fixed, something repeating itself without awareness, like a memory that hadn't faded. And I took a slow breath, trying to steady myself, thinking for a moment that I should walk away, that I should leave the hallway and put distance between me and whatever this was. But before I could move, something changed. Something subtle at first, but impossible to ignore, because the air shifted, not around me, but around her, and the temperature dropped just enough for me to feel it. A cold that didn't spread outward but stayed concentrated exactly where she stood, and the repetition didn't stop, but something about it felt different, like the loop was no longer isolated. Then, for the first time since I had seen her, the pattern broke, not dramatically, not suddenly, but in a way that felt wrong, because the tilt of her head stopped halfway, and she held it there, completely still, as if something had interrupted the sequence itself. The moment the pattern broke and she held that unnatural position, my chest tightened in a way that felt immediate and instinctive, because up until that point, everything I had been seeing followed a structure, a repetition that at least made some kind of sense, but now the consistency was gone, and what replaced it felt far worse. I stood completely still, my eyes fixed on her as she remained frozen mid-motion, her head tilted at an angle that didn't look comfortable, didn't look natural. And the longer she held that position, the more it felt like something else had taken control of the moment, something that wasn't part of the loop I had been watching before. And the air around her felt heavier, colder, more concentrated, like whatever had been replaying had just been interrupted by something aware. I swallowed slowly, my breathing more controlled now, not because I was calm, but because I didn't want to draw attention to myself. And that thought alone made something shift deeper inside me, because it meant I no longer felt like an observer. I felt like something in the room could now notice me. The hallway seemed quieter than before, not just silent, but empty in a way that made every second feel stretched. And as I watched her, waiting for the movement to continue, waiting for the pattern to resume, it didn't. She remained there, frozen in that half-turned position, her presence no longer distant, no longer disconnected, but something closer, something more focused. Then, slowly, without completing the motion she had started, she changed direction, not continuing the turn, but shifting just enough that her face aligned more directly toward me, and my chest tightened instantly because this time, her eyes didn't pass over me. This time, they stopped. The moment her eyes stopped on me, everything in my chest tightened at once, because that single change shattered the only thing that had made the situation feel distant, and now there was no separation left between what I was seeing and what was aware of me. I didn't move, not even slightly, because something about the way she was looking at me felt different from before. It wasn't empty anymore. It wasn't distant. It was focused, deliberate, like whatever had been replaying had shifted into something present, something capable of seeing me standing there. And the longer that moment held, the heavier the air in the hallway became, pressing in from all sides in a way that made it harder to breathe normally. Her expression didn't change much. It remained calm on the surface, but there was something underneath it now. Something subtle that hadn't been there before. Like the stillness wasn't emptiness anymore. It was restraint. And that difference made the unease settle deeper into something sharper. I became aware of my own breathing again, the sound of it too loud in that silence, and I tried to steady it, tried to slow it down. But the awareness of her gaze made it difficult to fully control, because I could feel it now, not just see it. The way her attention held on me without shifting, without blinking, without breaking. Then something changed again. The space between us felt smaller. I hadn't seen her step, hadn't seen any movement at all, but the distance was different, closer than it had been a second ago, and that realization hit instantly. Sharp and undeniable, because I hadn't looked away, I hadn't blinked long enough to miss anything, and yet she was nearer, her presence stronger, more defined, like whatever had been holding her in place before no longer applied. My chest tightened further as I resisted the instinct to step back, because something told me that reacting suddenly might make it worse, might change the situation in a way I couldn't control, and for a few seconds, neither of us moved, the silence stretching between us in a way that felt almost deliberate. Then, she tilted her head again, not the same as before, not part of the pattern. This time, it felt like a reaction. My breathing became uneven as I watched that movement, because it was slower, more controlled, and the angle was different, more precise, like she was trying to understand what she was looking at. And that thought alone made something shift deeper inside me, because it meant I was no longer outside of whatever this was. I was part of it now. The temperature dropped again, sharper this time, and I could feel it across my arms, across my chest. The cold no longer centered just around her, but spreading outward, filling the hallway in a way that made everything feel heavier. And for the first time since I had seen her, I felt something else alongside the fear. Recognition. Not from me, from her. The moment that feeling of recognition settled in, my chest tightened in a way that felt deeper than fear, because it wasn't just that she could see me now, it was that she was becoming aware of me in a way that didn't belong to whatever loop she had been trapped in before, and the longer her gaze stayed fixed on me, the more that awareness seemed to grow. I didn't move, not because I didn't want to, but because something about the moment made movement feel like the wrong choice, like reacting too quickly would change something I couldn't undo, and the hallway around us felt heavier than ever. The silence no longer empty, but filled with something I couldn't define. Her expression shifted slightly, not in a dramatic way, but enough to notice the calm distance that had been there before, giving way to something more focused, more present, and that change made everything feel more real, more immediate, like whatever I was seeing wasn't just a memory anymore, it was happening now. The cold in the air intensified again, spreading outward from her in a way that made it harder to ignore, and I could feel it along my arms, across my face, like the space itself was reacting to her presence changing. Then, slowly, she took a step. This time I saw it. Clear, deliberate, real. My chest tightened instantly as the distance between us closed again, not by that unnatural shift from before, but by an actual movement, a a step forward that confirmed everything I had been trying not to accept, that whatever she was no longer confined to that repeating moment. She was moving within mine. I forced myself to stay where I was, my breathing uneven, my focus locked on her, because at that point, there was no pretending anymore, no distancing myself from what was happening, and as she stopped again, closer than before, her gaze remained fixed on me, unbroken, aware. Then she spoke, not loudly, not clearly, but enough. A faint sound, like words trying to form but not fully reaching the surface, something incomplete, something distant, and yet it carried just enough presence to make my chest tighten even further, because it meant whatever she wasn't just seeing me anymore. She was trying to reach me. The sound of her voice, faint and incomplete, settled into the silence in a way that made my chest tighten immediately, because it wasn't clear enough to understand. But it was enough to confirm that whatever I was standing in front of was no longer just a presence or a memory. It was something trying to connect. I didn't respond, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how, and the uncertainty of that made everything feel heavier, like any action I took could change the situation in a way I couldn't predict. Her gaze didn't shift, didn't break, and as I stood there, trying to steady my breathing, I realized something else that made the unease deepen. The hallway around us no longer felt like the same place I had been walking through earlier. It felt isolated, cut off, like the rest of the building had fallen away, leaving just this space and whatever was happening inside it. She tried again. The sound came out slightly clearer this time, still faint, still strained, but closer to forming something recognizable. My chest tightened as I leaned slightly forward without realizing it, trying to catch it, trying to understand what she was saying. Because there was something in the tone that didn't feel threatening, it felt urgent, like whatever she was trying to say mattered. Then, slowly, the word formed. Wait. It was quiet, almost lost in the stillness, but unmistakable. And the moment I heard it, something shifted in the air again, the cold pressing in tighter, the space feeling smaller, like the moment itself had changed direction. I didn't move, didn't step back or forward. I just stood there, my chest tight, my breathing uneven, because that single word made everything more real than it had been before. Her expression changed again, just slightly, enough to show something that hadn't been there before, not distance, not calm, but something closer to urgency. And as she looked at me, really looked this time, I realized something that made everything feel heavier than before, because this wasn't just about her becoming aware of me. It felt like she needed me. I swallowed slowly, my throat tight, and for a moment I considered speaking, asking her what she meant, asking what she wanted. But the words didn't come, because something else interrupted the moment. A sound behind me. My chest tightened instantly as I felt the shift in the air, subtle at first, but enough to pull my attention away from her, and even though I hadn't turned yet, I could feel it. Something else in the hallway. Something that hadn't been there before. Something that didn't belong to her. And in that moment, I understood something that made everything worse. She wasn't the only thing in that building. The moment I felt that second presence behind me, my chest tightened in a way that felt completely different from what I had been experiencing with her, because whatever was there didn't carry the same stillness, the same trapped feeling. It felt heavier, more deliberate, like something that wasn't repeating, but watching. I didn't turn immediately. I couldn't, because the shift in the air was enough to tell me that whatever was behind me was closer than I wanted it to be, and the awareness of it made every instinct in my body tighten at once. She saw it, before I did. Her eyes moved past me again, but this time, not in that empty, disconnected way from before. This time it was sharp, focused, reacting to something specific behind me, and the urgency in her expression changed instantly, replacing everything else. And that was when I realized something that made my chest tighten even further, because whatever she had been trying to say before, it wasn't about her. It was about what was behind me. The cold in the hallway shifted again, no longer centered around her, but spreading unevenly, as if something else had entered the space and was pushing against everything that was already there, and for the first time since I had seen her, I felt the urge to move, not slowly, not carefully, but immediately. Then she spoke again, clearer this time. "Don't." The word cut through the silence sharply, and before I could react, before I could fully process what she meant, the presence behind me moved. Not a step, not a sound, just closer. The air shifted sharply along my back, cold and immediate, and my chest tightened as I turned instinctively, faster than I had moved the entire time I had been there, because at that point, not looking felt worse than seeing. But when I turned, there was nothing there. The hallway stretched behind me exactly as it should have been. Empty, quiet, unchanged. And for a moment, I just stood there, my breathing uneven, my mind trying to catch up with what I had just felt, because the absence didn't make sense, not after how close it had seemed. Then, I turned back toward her, and she was gone. No movement, no fading, just gone. The hallway returned to what it had been before, dim, quiet, empty, but the feeling didn't reset, it didn't disappear with her. It stayed, lingering in the air like something unfinished. I didn't stay there after that. I walked back the way I came, faster than before, not running, but not slow either. Just enough to put distance between me and that hallway. And as I moved, the building started to feel normal again, the sounds returning, the air losing that unnatural weight, but the memory of it stayed sharp. Later, when I asked about it, when I tried to understand what I had seen, someone mentioned the stories, the ones people didn't talk about openly, about a woman seen in that building, dressed like she belonged to another time, appearing in hallways late at night, repeating the same movements, and sometimes trying to speak. They called her the Flapper, but what stayed with me wasn't just her. It was the way she looked past me, and the way she tried to warn me. Some spirits aren't trying to scare you. They're trying to tell you something before it's too late. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to True Haunting Log so you don't miss the next experience. And if you've ever encountered something that felt like a warning rather than a threat, send your story to truehauntinglog@gmail.com. Because sometimes, the most dangerous presence isn't the one you see. It's the one someone else is trying to protect you from.